from the Key Radio Studios in Provo, Utah, and broadcasting live throughout Utah County, Sevier County, South Central Utah, Carbon County, and the Uinta Basin. It's your good friends Mike and Heather in the morning.
Hello, good friend. Yes, it is Friday, and we're glad that you are with us today. In the studio, yours truly, Heather Zander. We have Grant Burkhalter at the controls, and always chiming in with some really good bits of wisdom that are actually kind of tweetable.
Not yesterday.
No, yesterday you
I
were
didn't
pretty
say
silent.
anything yesterday.
I
I made
know.
a point of it. I'm like, what if I don't say anything today?
Will anybody
Because
notice?
I was like 5-10 minutes into the show, and it's like, I haven't said anything. I'm going to go the whole show, not say anything.
So today you have to make up for last time.
I'm very talkative
Okay,
today
it's
now.
my turn.
Getting it all out.
My turn to be quiet? Well, that ain't happening. Okay. Pastor Chris Dotson of Lone Peak Bible Church in Highland, Utah. Good morning.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good. It's good to have you here. What's going on? What's going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, we've been making our way through the book of Ephesians. We're getting to the
Nice.
end of that.
Okay.
And
Now,
looking
how long
forward.
did it take? It's like four chapters, right? Four,
Yeah.
six.
Six. Yep. I don't know. I don't know when we
just
started.
Keep going until we're done.
Yeah.
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 Now, some people look at that six. It's a short book, right? And yet,
Oh, it's been a little while.
yeah.
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 At least I'd say 6 months, probably.
That's a good study.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Uh-huh.
Awesome.
It's been really good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're finishing that up?
Yep. We'll finish that up this month, and then we'll start in on the book of Mark.
Very good. The
Yeah.
Go Gospel.
Yeah.
Loving that. Loving that. And Christmas time is kind of like busy for you, I'm assuming.
Yep. Things are going well as far as plans for Christmas and whatnot. We'll have a candlelight service on Christmas Eve.
Okay.
And so we're looking forward to that.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And friend, I'm just going to just go to your Facebook page,
Yep.
right? And that's got all the information there.
Sure.
You're like, I have no idea. That's not my job. Well,
There is information there.
Yeah.
I don't know
Just
if
don't
it has
know
all
what-
the information. Yeah.
If you don't know, you could just, message. That would be
That
easy,
would be
right?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're pretty approachable people. I want to remind you tomorrow's only a day away. At least that's what I've heard. If you are in the Vernal area, the Uinta Basin Christian Academy is hosting their first ever holiday boutique, and that's going to start at 10 o'clock a.m. That's a great way it says last minute Christmas shopping. I start in December, so I'm like, man, I don't know. Whatever. And then what does that say about me? And then Grace Bible Church is also hosting their December their community Christmas party, just celebrating the birth of Jesus. That's tomorrow. It's a free event. It says to RSVP by yesterday, but you know what? I don't think they're going to turn you away. Just remember that maybe they're going to have pizza, and they're going to have ornament making and cookie decorating and games for the kids. You know what? Just call them and say, hey, last minute. That's what I do. I mean, they're pretty gracious people. So there's that. And that's going on tomorrow. That starts at 2 o'clock p.m., goes to 4. And then there's just a lot of Christmas Eve services going on. And friend, I just really want you to check out local churches. If you're like, I really want to celebrate Christ's birth, and I live in this area, where do I go? Why don't you just let us know? A lot of times we could just say, hey, I know what's going on here. And you could give us a call. That would be fine. Let's see. What else can I tell you? Oh, we have great Christmas lineups that are happening too on Key Radio starting on, I think it's the 18th of December. A lot of really, really neat Christmas programs. So we're looking forward to this holiday season as well, and just glorifying the Lord and celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. So I love this. I love this time of year because we get to remember all that God has done for us in special ways. We do it every day, but this is just a little special,
Yeah.
right? So let's see. What else can I tell you, friend? I think that's it. Grant, do I have anything else?
I think you got it.
Okay, great. Generosity. I want you to just remember to be generous this Christmas season, especially. There are people out there who, Christmas is hard for them, and not just financially, but I think emotionally too. And many of us, maybe we've lost some loved ones, and this is the first holiday season. We have great memories, but we've lost our loved one, and there's going to be a hole in the festivities. And it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to remember and be a little sad. But for those of us who see that, let's remember that and come alongside and be generous with our time and generous with our kind words, and maybe even a hug. and say, hey, thinking about you this season. So that's what we do. That's what we do. We love one another. That's the mark of the Christian. So let's be really good at that. Huh? Oh, wait. All right. Today I'm excited because I was just telling Grant, I picked this particular topic because I think I'm going to be really convicted. I love that in many ways I get to pick what we're going to talk about because I just really feel like maybe I'm struggling in an area and I want to talk about these things. And I know I'm not the only person. And I was just kind of going through God's word and came across Second Thessalonians and idleness. Idleness is a topic that I think we don't talk about much, right? We actually love to be idle and we talk about I think it's important to put margin in our lives, right? Like, don't be so busy that you're not available when opportunities arise. But you can go the opposite way and not be doing anything at all. And God has a lot to say about idleness. And so I want to talk about that as well, because we have a tendency to go one way, one extreme or another extreme. And so let's just dig in a little bit. Okay. That's good, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, it says, starting in verse 6, it says, now we command you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from any brother who is walking in idleness and not in accord with the tradition that you have received from us. Okay, so I don't want to necessarily talk about the brother at this point. I want to kind of look at the mirror and ask ourselves, wait a minute. Am I that brother? That's what I want to know. Chris, how do you want to begin this?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Are people avoiding you?
Yeah.
If they are, maybe this is the reason. I don't know. I hope not.
Yeah, right?
Yep. So this is really interesting. The whole idea of idleness, it gets partnered with the biblical concept of working, right? And so we have to have a proper understanding of what work is. And I think a lot of times we view work as something that is bad, or we view something as as a necessary evil, or just something I'm trying to get away from, right? We go through our 5 days so that we can get to the weekend, or we work so that we can have that vacation, or we work so that we can get to retirement. It's always, in our mindset is a lot of times, how do I get out of this? And work isn't necessarily something that we should look at as something that we want to get out of.
Or a necessary evil.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So work is something that God gives to us. And we see that even from the beginning in the garden, in Genesis, God gives work there to take care of the garden, there to cultivate it. And then they're given this authority over God's creation. And so we kind of look at work as a bad thing, and we can get a misunderstanding whenever we partner the curse of what happened in the beginning with work, because we know that it changed the nature of our work, but it didn't change that we're supposed to be working.
Okay.
Right? And so one of the coolest things about the Christian life is that the things that we do don't have to be we don't have to segment our life in so many different ways that we see one thing as being for God and one thing being for people or others or myself, etc. But we can view everything that we do as an act of worship, right?
Okay.
And so as an act of worship, we are able to work in a way that brings glory to God. And so that's where we have to start, I think. When you think about this idleness of wanting to get away from work or wanting to or working too much, there's a proper perspective in understanding that work is a gift from God, and it is something that He has he dignifies as a good thing, right?
Right. Okay, so it's a good thing.
Yep.
And yet there was a fall, and so sin kind of muddied the waters, if you will, on our attitude toward work. And maybe we start there, right? What is our attitude toward work? Is there any sinful attitudes that we need to be aware of that maybe we don't necessarily that we're not aware of, right? Maybe we're just oblivious to it and looking at our lives and saying, okay, I'm going to go to work. It's another day. I'm so glad it's Friday, right? So what would be some sinful attitudes toward work?
Yeah. So I think that as a follower of Jesus, right, the the idea of work, it's just understanding that it can be worship, right? And so anytime that you go into work and you're not worshipful, it can be a bad thing. And I think it is a bad thing, right? And so you go into work thinking about yourself. You go into work thinking about your paycheck. You go into work thinking about the stress of managing whatever that situation is. You go into work, anytime you get the focus off of what it ought to be on, it can be sinful. It opens up the opportunity for sin.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really hard, right? Because as people, we have the world around us that tells us, this is how you should think about work. But we also ourselves, we can be tired and we can fight laziness and complacency and this idea of idleness. And so all of these things, they war against us. And this, we talked about Ephesians,
Yes,
right? I
yes.
can't get away from Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 6 talks about this. Oh, look at that. My Bible kind of just opens up
Yeah,
to
that's a
Ephesians
shocker,
now,
right?
Yeah. So Ephesians chapter 6, we're given these warnings that we're in a battle. And all of that comes just after we're told the Spirit-filled life looks a certain way. And we're told how it looks in these different relationships, where your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your kids, but also in this relationship between servants and masters. Let's see, verse 5 of chapter 6 says, "Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and the sincerity of your heart, as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With goodwill render service as to the Lord and not to men." And so even slaves are encouraged and directed to do the things that they do as unto the Lord and not to men. So the focus is that I'm doing this for God. This service, whatever it is, right? Maybe you're shoveling snow off the driveway, or you're at work today, you're crunching your numbers, or you're moving boxes, or whatever it is. Those things can be done unto the Lord, and so that's what we're encouraged. Now, in Ephesians chapter 6, it goes further right there into verse 10. And we're told that we're in this epic battle. Mm-hmm. This battle is not against flesh and blood, but against these forces, spiritual evil forces, right? And so I don't think it's by mistake that Paul goes into that order, that these things, as the husband and wife is a picture of the gospel, the picture of Christ in the church, as children and parents, they have this relationship, and their relationships should be such that it provides avenues for the gospel, right? Children are to be taught the gospel. The same thing with those who have authority over others, or if you have someone over you who has this authority over you, there should be avenues for the gospel in those relationships. And so I think that understanding the enemy that we face, we're encouraged and we're given this exhortation that, look, this can be hard. There's going to be a battle that goes on here, a battle maybe in your mind, a battle that happens with your flesh, a battle of the world and all the thoughts that come from outside of us, the way the world thinks about work. There's a fight that goes on here. And so be careful, right? When we approach a topic like this, I don't want to come into it saying, oh, I've got this completely figured out.
Right.
At the same time, I understand everybody, we're all fighting for this proper mindset, the right kind of mentality, the opportunity for the gospel to move forward, because we look at these different relationships in a way that is different from the way the world looks at them. We're trying to have a biblical mindset in the relationships that we share.
So we're basically working on a battlefield.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Because we don't have enough challenge in our lives, right?
Right.
Let's talk about this battlefield a little bit too, because some of us don't understand what it means to work as unto the Lord. That seems to be a different level of expectation. And if we don't properly understand the doctrine of Christ, the doctrine of salvation, and the doctrine, can I even say the doctrine of work, we're going to get this all topsy-turvy, meaning that we're going to be working ourselves to the bone, thinking that we're working as unto the Lord, when in fact what we're trying to do is strive to climb up a ladder that we were never meant to climb up. So specifically, I want to talk about the grace of God and how it is that because through the grace of God and what he has given us, that then we can, with great, I would say, confidence, that we can work as unto the Lord, and it can be a joyful thing instead of something that is absolutely drudgery. And again, I'm talking about redemption here. So God redeemed work. Tell us the difference between a Christian's viewpoint on work and what the world tells us work is all about.
Right. So Ephesians doesn't start in chapter 5.
Right.
Right. So chapter 1, 1, 2, and 3 give you all of the information, all the doctrine, the things that you need to know, the way that you should think, so that you can live out, chapters 4, 5, and 6.
Okay.
And so in chapter 1, you're just blown away with what God does for us in redeeming us and rescuing us and saving us. And then you get to chapter 2 and you're blown away again because we're reminded that it's not because of anything that we're able to accomplish. It's not because of the things that we do, but it's because of what God has done that we're able to have this relationship with him. And what is it? Ephesians 2, 8, and 9.
Right.
Right. You want to read that real quick?
Yeah, it is by grace you've been saved and through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast.
Mm-hmm. It's so beautiful, right?
Let's say it again. I feel like I said it too fast. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to make sure we're not doing the doing.
Right. So often we find value in the things that we do because we're trying to attain something, right? We find an identity in my job. Mm-hmm. We find an identity in this accomplishment, this power or authority, position, whatever. And Ephesians 2 says, no, hang on a minute. You are who you are because of what God says, not because of what you have determined to place in, as a replacement for what God says. And so the work that I do, the mentality behind the things that I do is that it's not so that I can earn some place or some position or some relationship, but the things that I do now are because of who I am in Christ, because of the faith that I've expressed in Jesus. And so Jesus changes everything for the believer. He changes the way that we look at work. He changes the way that we look at life, changes the mentality that we have when we go to work. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess you have to come to a starting point in recognizing that God is the creator of all things. Mm-hmm. Not like the Bible just assumes that in the beginning, God. Okay. So there is God, and you can look around the entire world and you can see this striking order and say, wow, out of chaos does not come order. So there is somebody who is the great designer, the great organizer, right, if you will. But it's God from mm-hmm. all eternity. So we have to start there. And then as God is a creator of all things, he's the creator of the human being. That means you and me. And so because he is our creator, he also designed us in the specific way that is for our good and for our flourishing. Now, friend, we also know as we look around the world that the order is constantly being battled against every day. There is a lot of chaos going around, there's a lot of angst and anxiety. That was never part of the original order. Sin entered the world, and because of that, there is a curse. Like the order has been compromised, mm-hmm. right? And part of that is our mentality, how we relate to God, how we relate to each other, and then, of course, how we relate to our activities, such as work, and our attitude toward that. Mm-hmm. But God is the great Redeemer. And so if we could just pause there on this, for it is by grace you've been saved. There is redemption. That's redemption language right there. How did God redeem us, and how does God redeem work?
Mm-hmm. So because of our sin, as you mentioned, we've been separated from God, and God is He's gracious and merciful, right? And in His grace and mercy, He saw fit to redeem humanity through the death of His Son. And so He sends Jesus into the world, who lived a perfect life, right? And because He lived this perfect life, He is able to be a sacrifice like no other. He's able to step in on our behalf. And what God does is He exchanges the righteousness of Jesus with the sinfulness of humanity. And so there's this beautiful exchange that happens on the cross, right? The wrath of God is poured out on Jesus, poured out on sin. And in exchange, by faith in Jesus, we're then given this righteousness of God. And so this is how we're able to be made righteous. Does that mean we do everything perfectly? No. But we have the capability now to pursue righteousness, a capability that we did not have before because of who we are as a new creature in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that aspect of faith. We can't, I don't want to de-emphasize that. I want to emphasize that, more, right? Faith is what we need.
Yeah.
And so believing in Jesus is how we come to that relationship, how we're able to enjoy that fellowship with God. And He makes a way for us to be able to do that through Jesus.
Mm-hmm. I love the word fellowship with God, and that can be a very terrifying thing when you recognize how holy God is and how sinful we are. Like, if we really are honest with ourselves, the holiness of God is a very terrible thing in that it's scary, right? If you really think about it. And you can go back to like Isaiah, right? Where he is confronted. Like, Isaiah's a pretty swell guy, right? There's nothing written about him that was like terrible and a lot of, deceit in him or anything like that. But he is confronted by the Lord and he is absolutely undone. Daniel is another guy, right? Daniel, for the most part, I mean, you're reading throughout, there's nothing you can see in the account of Daniel where he's a bad dude, right? He's always been so faithful, but he is confronted by the Lord and he falls down as though dead. I mean, the holiness of God is so striking. And yet, through the redemption work of Jesus, we can have fellowship with God. And not only does he enable us and makes us a new creature, and he enables us to do these things, but he is with us through the Holy Spirit who dwells in us and who guides us in life. And so he's the one who can inform, or we should submit to him so he does inform the way that we approach things such as work, right? So that's an exciting thing. And so, friend, today, I just want to really make sure that you understand. I mean, if you don't have a relationship with Christ, can you enjoy work and not fall into idleness? Well, yeah. I mean, that's a possibility. But you'll never be able to work in accordance with the will of God, which is to offer that as a worship, because you're not worshiping God. And that's really the ideal, right? Is that you are working as a form of worship to the Lord and your Creator. Grant, you got something?
When it comes to work, there's kind of like this busy work, right? Where we just fill up all our time with activity. And that seems to be kind of like an idle work to me, where it's like you're not working towards anything, you're not working for anything. You just want to distract yourself. You just want to fill up your time and your energy to do something because you can't sit still. Is there a difference between being still and doing nothing? Is there like an idleness that can come in activity and inactivity, and yet there can be a productivity in inactivity? You know what I'm saying? Just by resting, that's not idleness.
Right.
That you're still producing something, and that is to restore your like a physical, mental, emotional health by resting, right? So how do we navigate that? What's the difference there between, this idleness in work and this idleness in inactivity, and the productivity in rest and the productivity in work. How do we navigate all that?
Mm-hmm. There's a balance, and that balance is hard to find sometimes. And so I think that's why this gets, I guess one of the things that gets brought up is how do you do these two things? Let me read a passage from Colossians chapter 3 for you, and I'll just point out again kind of a basic generic idea, right? In Colossians chapter 3, it says, "Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God." So first of all, you're to seek the things above. Verse 2, "Set your mind on the things above, not on things that are on the earth." So this is a mentality. So you set your mind on these things. "For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory." I've been teaching our youth group, and last night we came to this passage, and I've been thinking about it since then. This idea that when Christ, who is your life, there is this impact that Christ has on our lives as we follow him, right? It impacts everything that we are and everything that we do. And so I want to be careful not to compartmentalize my life, right? So like say, okay, there's this area of rest, and there's this area of work, and there's this area of, I would just say, try and think through things in terms of Christ is my life, and so I want to worship him. Can I worship him in rest? Yes. Can I worship him in work? Yes. And I should be doing those, worshiping him as I do those two different things. There's some principles though, right, that can kind of govern how we think about work and how we think about rest. You have the example of God who created, right? For 6 days he works, and for the seventh day he takes a break. And in Exodus, we're given that same instruction. So I think that it is a good, as a principle, to take time for rest and a time for work. That might look different for different people. Mm-hmm. Some people can endure a little bit more work than others, and some people might need a little bit more rest than others. And so I'm not going to try and give you an outline of, well, this is how many hours you should make sure that you put in, and this is how much rest that you need. What I'm going to say is, as you try and find a balance in your life, make sure that you're worshipful in every area. That's really easy to say and really hard to do.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, because some of the things that we do, even in rest, you're just caught up in the moment. Am I really being worshipful? And we can end up, if we're really taking those words seriously and we're trying to figure this out, we can be exhausted being restful. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're like, am I really doing this for the Lord? Am I like, and so again, there's Jesus, right? And again, if we do all this stuff divorced from the idea that we have been redeemed by Jesus and there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, then we have to also know that the Lord is walking with us through all these things and helping us learn. And we can rest in the fact that maybe we are not doing this well, but God is going to be helping us to figure this out, right?
Yeah. Right. We have, Jesus does walk with us through those things, and then we've been given his Spirit that, man, if you're feeling some conviction, then that's something you should take a minute and examine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, there's other places in God's Word where there's great admonition for those that saying, listen, work is good. Do not be idle. One of those situations is in 1 Timothy 5, right? Looking at, let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband and having a reputation for good works, if she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies. Like what? Saying that they should not. I mean, what is this referring to, this enrollment? Is that like church membership? What is that? I mean, the context is very important. But there is this is kind of scary because it's sounding as though being idle can lead to other sins.
Mm-hmm.
So first, what is that enrollment we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's so. Some people are okay. You can help them.
Yeah.
But there's some widows and orphans, etc., that are in the position where they can't help themselves, and so we're not saying that you should never do something to help someone else out. But there is a strict warning, right? To be careful. If someone has the ability to work and they don't, then there's a danger there. And if you're in that situation and you're not working, work in some sense becomes kind of a guard against certain sins.
Mm-hmm.
And you can fall into the entrapment of those certain sins, being a busybody, a gossip, etc. If you're not filling your time with work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's what's going on there.
Okay. Which then again, we go back to 2 Thessalonians,
Mhm.
right? Because that's kind of the same thing. In that situation, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but people were waiting for the return of Jesus, right? And they were so busy looking up that they were
Yeah.
like, hey, let's just get a lawn chair, maybe get a nice little glass of iced tea and let's wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's two kind of thoughts that collide in 2 Thessalonians. First of all, you have the Greek culture, right?
Okay.
And in Greek culture, there was this emphasis put on not working. It was seen more as like a spiritual thing to be smart and to talk philosophy. And so if you were someone who was a worker, it was kind of looked down on, frowned upon. That was a job that was for your servants, etc. And then that collides with this other idea that apparently there was this false letter that was circulating in the church, and Paul is confronting that. And the false letter is like, look, that Jesus has already returned, and there was this misunderstanding around the return of Christ, and so there's this idea that maybe that we should be focusing more time on studying, and we shouldn't be working, and so all of those things kind of collide within the church from the cultural standpoint and from maybe more of a religious standpoint. And so Paul gets pretty strict, right? As we read in verse 6, this is a pretty strict deal, right? If you see somebody that's not working, then you should kind of avoid that person. Yeah.
And he gets even, I think, harsher because he says, okay, so it's not in, so let me just go back up a little bit here. So it says, keep away from any brother who is walking in idleness and not in accord with the tradition that you received from us. So he's not saying.
This is not the first time. Yeah.
And
Hard-headed
also
people.
what he's showing is, we're an example, right? Look at us. We're working. We're doing stuff here. We're not idle. And so you need to look at our example here, right? But then he says, for you yourselves know how you ought to imitate us because we were not idle when we were with you. So again, it's not saying do as I say and don't do as I do, which I think is really an important lesson here. And he says, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it, but with toil and labor. We worked night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you, which I think is a great implication that people who are idle are a great burden to those around them. And I don't think people recognize that. We're so internally focused that we don't see the burden that that we are on other people, especially when we are able to work, when we are able to be a contributing member to our tribe, if you will.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Paul steps into this culture and he says, look, I don't want to create any kind of room for them to accuse me of anything, and I want to set the example for them. And so he starts working, even though other passages he talks about how it's okay to care for someone who's watching out for the spiritual needs of the church, etc. And so I think he just sets the example. It's a cool thing to see Paul willing to do that. Yeah.
And then we can continue on, right? Because it says it was not because we do not have that right, which you just said, right? But to give you in ourselves an example to imitate. For even when we were with you, we would give, for even when we were with you, we would give you this command. And then this is the harsh one that I underlined in my Bible a while back. It says, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busy bodies. Okay, so there's a godly busy and there's a sinful busy. There's a busyness that allows you to provide and work and contribute and use that as a spiritual act of service and worship to the Lord. And then there's the busy body thing.
Yeah.
So now many people are going to look at this and there is a great need. I'm just going to, for a moment, I'm going to step back from the mirror. I'm going to look at the world around us. And in Salt Lake City, for instance, and as well as in all of our communities, but it's just really, I think, concentrated in Salt Lake at this time. There's a lot of concern for homelessness. There's a lot of concern for people who are just really, really struggling. And some people will take Bible verses like this: if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. And they'll whack the people over the head with the Bible, basically, and say, you're not working, you don't need my money. And there can be that cold-heartedness. And on the other hand, we can go the opposite extreme, and we can say, listen, you're clearly in need. How dare us even mention that you should work for your meal? That's just a horrible thing to do. So how, again, humans are such extremists, right? So taking this out of context would be terrible, but what is the biblical way of dealing with idleness in that? Like, when do we know it's idleness and when do we know that it's not?
I think there's a big distinction that needs to be made here, right? And we have to ask the question, who is Paul talking to?
Okay.
He's talking to believers.
Okay.
And he's saying, this is the way a believer should live. This is the way someone who follows Jesus should act. And so when we come into contact with people that, they're not following Jesus, then we have to put ourselves in a position to be able to communicate the gospel. And we want to love the people that are outside of the church, as well as, more importantly, the people inside the church. And so I think that there's a distinction between those two things. A lot of the people, you might talk about people in Salt Lake, people in the world, whatever, that are in a hard situation. We would deal with them a little bit differently than we would someone who's in the church.
Okay.
Someone who says, I'm a follower of Jesus, and they are idle and that they don't work. That is a shameful thing. And so you don't want to be that kind of person.
So this is to the church. And I think that's always a really interesting distinction, too, because we tend to take Bible verses out of their context. And that can be a good thing as far as principles are concerned. But we have a tendency to hold the world up by that standard. Grant, are you going there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We want the Bible to say what we want it to say. We want that validation of, no, in this instance, I don't need to show mercy. I don't need to show grace. I don't need to extend the same mercy and grace that was extended to me. No, in this instance, they're not working, so therefore, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to help them. I don't need this is vindication, justification for me to treat them this way. And we will look so heavily at one Bible verse that's like, this says what I want it to say, that I don't need to balance that with other Bible verses or the greater context of the Bible verse that I'm looking at, so that we can just make it say what we want, so that we can justify our behavior or our unwillingness to sacrifice. That's the big thing about giving, is it's a sacrifice. The big thing about forgiveness is it's a sacrifice. It costs us something. Mercy, grace, it always costs something to the person extending it. And it's always a gift to the person receiving it. And we like to use one verse to kind of be like, yeah, we don't have to do that. Not here. I only need to extend mercy and grace and forgiveness to someone who can extend it right back. so that we can have kind of this exchange of like, I'll forgive you this time because I know in the future you'll forgive me this. And that's not true forgiveness. That's not real grace or mercy. That's manipulation. That's all that is.
You're reminding me of Micah chapter 6, where it says, God has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. So when you're dealing with situations, we can't be bludgeoning people with the same scripture that's telling us to be loving and generous and kind. So there needs to be, it has to be both. And now let's do two things here. The first thing is, let's step back to the mirror for a minute.
Okay.
And we have to ask ourselves, am I being idle? Am I being that person who that's the work ethic, right? The Christian work ethic. And that's what we should have. How many people, though, have complained? I just remember in the past somebody had mentioned this to me, and it horrified me. But they were talking to an employer, and the employer said, I am never, ever going to hire a Christian ever again, because every time I do, they are the laziest people on the planet. Like, I was horror-struck by that, because I'm like, that should never be. That should never be. So I think the first thing we need to do is to open our eyes, Christian, ourselves, go before that mirror, even better, go before the foot of the cross, go to the Lord and ask him to look into your heart and to expose the sin of idleness if it's in you. How would there be any other, like, are there signs that we are being idle? I mean, maybe help us open our eyes, right?
Signs that you're being idle? I think that, well, number one, if you're not taking care of your family, right? If you're, it says if you're not willing to work, then you shouldn't be fed. And so there's this willingness, this desire to have a job. I understand if someone's in a position where they're in between two jobs or whatever, but they have this desire. They want to work, and they're just trying to find the right, the place where they fit. That's a different scenario,
right?
But I think that it begins with it starts with a mentality and then a desire to do the work. If you find yourself constantly trying to evade work, you're scheming to figure out how I can get out of work, then I think that's a red flag. If you find yourself thinking about your work as I said before, a necessary evil, if you're trying to get to the weekend, if you see the weekend as being better than during the week, if you see a Sunday being your time of worship, right, instead of seeing your work week as also a time of worship, I think that can be like a something you need to think about. Spend some time in prayer on that.
Yeah, another big thing I would say, especially for us today, is distraction, where we constantly need to have some sort of idle thing going on in our lives, where we constantly need to be on our phones, we need to be scrolling, we need to be watching, consuming, doing something. We can't just have the moments of quiet or moments of unbroken, like, concentration on something. We can't let our minds just be. We need to have like this idle, busy work. We need something, and we're always. But the thing is, it's not producing anything. It is just, I'm just scrolling. I'm just texting. I'm just whatever it is. That's our own personal vice. It's just to fill the time. It's to. We just kind of have whatever it is to just, but it isn't work. It's just doing some sort of activity or just to distract ourselves. We spend so much time like disengaging our brains so that we don't have to think.
When you don't think about work as worship, right, it can become a stressful, burdensome thing. And when work becomes a stressful, burdensome thing, we look for avenues in which we can alleviate that burden, or we look for I've heard it put this way before. We self-medicate ourselves with this whatever it is, right? You're scrolling through your Facebook feed, you're scrolling through your TikTok, your whatever those videos are, etc. And we can we quote self-medicate, in that we remove ourselves from the stress of the work, rather than going to God, who gives us a proper perspective on what work should be. And so we're just in this like cycle, right? Work's messed up. I need a relief. I need to get out of this. And so we go to this other thing, and that doesn't really fix it. And so I go back to work the next day, and there's this stress, and it's overwhelming. And so then I go to this, it's just this cycle.
It just kind of reminds me of this traditional mindset of like the dad who works really hard, right? But he gets home and he plops himself in front of the couch, turns on the television. The kids are running around like, Dad, 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 right? And of course he needs to decompress. I mean, that there needs to be something there. But he just sits in front of the television the whole time, where the family is like so happy to see him, but he's just absolutely removed himself. And that can be a very dangerous thing, where you're working so hard and you're not recognizing work as the spiritual act of worship. And then you get home and you're just idle there, and you're not recognizing that your kids need you, your wife needs you, and needs you to just be present. So even in your decompression, which is this, it's not a bad thing to decompress after a long day of work, but you can't stay there. You can't stay there and scroll or run to the bathroom and use your phone. You know what I'm saying? Like any way to escape. Escapism is, I would say, a form of idleness at that point, right? But so if you're doing that, I would say you might want to consider changing things up a little bit into a more healthy pattern, the way that God intended us to be, right?
Right. You get into these routines, right? And so maybe this is just the chance for you to reflect on those routines.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And it is very personal.
It is, yeah.
It's like what's dangerous for me might not be a danger for you. I might enjoy just like watching TV, and you might like, scrolling through whatever social media. And social media isn't that big of a draw for me. There isn't much there for me, but, I like video games. I like, TV shows. I enjoy, listening to podcasts, and I might find that I'm filling too much of my time with that. And so none of those things are bad, but it might be too much of this disengaging for me or for you or whatever. And so it's a very like personal thing, where it's like watching all the sports might be your personal pitfall, and that's not a personal pitfall for me, but it might be for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having the sports on, or even using that as like a family bonding thing, where it's like, oh yeah, this is our team. We all root for the team, and we can all come together and have this in common. And so it's but then it could become, even though it could be like a family pitfall. So you never know. It's very personal.
Right. Well, I guess the other thing too, I wanted to retirement. Retirement can be one of those things where, okay, I've worked my whole life,
Right.
and now I am done, and I'm gonna. And sometimes when you don't have work and you don't need to work because you've worked your whole life and saved up for this particular time in your life, you can also fall prey to idleness, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what would be some things? Would it be kind of the same thing with the retirement age and saying, here are some things that we need to be aware of in case we find ourselves falling into idleness? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what would be that? Because you don't have to work per se.
Right. Let me just say that in God's economy of how things work, right? Work doesn't stop. And so you might not have your regular job. You might not be doing your, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, whatever it is. But that doesn't mean that it's over, right? Those aren't, It's not at that point that you're able to waste your life, right? It's at that point that you have more time in which you're able to engage in the things of God. And so I think there may be even more responsibility that goes into that time, that the management of that time, as you don't have the same kind of requirements or responsibilities you had before, but they change.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
Don't
just
give up. Keep on going. I know that you might not be able to do all the things that you could do when you were younger, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean you're not useful and not helpful. I can tell you that some of the more, we'll call them more mature, right, Christians in our church
More experience.
are some of the most helpful and most, I just appreciate them so much, and the way that they're able to come alongside some of the other parents that are just overwhelmed, and they're able to relieve some of the burden and minister to the people in ways that, people in my stage, I can't minister to them in the way that they do. And so you're never done serving God.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something very important, and that is there are people all around us, and we're always coming into contact with people, and we tend to instead of looking at the people around us, we tend to look inward. We tend to look at ourselves, and there are so many opportunities to love others, to reach out to others, and we tend to. I don't know. It's a challenging thing. It's very there. It's high risk. When we reach out to someone, there's a lot at stake there, and it's uncomfortable, and it can especially reach that point in when you're more mature, when you've lived a while. People start to pass away on you. And your friends, your family, it just starts to shrink. And it can be difficult to, as an older person, to reach out and to make those new friends and to roll those dice again and again. And when it's people who are older, when you're making friends with older people, like, hey, they're not going to be around much longer either. I'm not going to be around much longer. What's the point? And it can seem very futile, but it's worth it. If you look around, they're especially at younger people, they don't know what's going on. They don't know their left from their right. They're struggling. And you've been around a while. You don't know everything, but you know a few things. And just help out where you can. Do what you can. Don't look at yourself and think, I don't have anything to offer, because you do. You have so much to offer your community, especially as an older person.
I just think in the last few minutes, I just want to continue on with 2 Corinthians 3, because, it says, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. You're not supposed to, it says, as for you in 13, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good. If anyone does not obey what we say in this letter, take note of that person and have nothing to do with him, that he may be ashamed. And you would think that would be a very heartless thing to say. But you can't stop there, because 15 says, do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. So there's a tough love, can we say here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so let's say we're confronted with a fellow believer in our church family, and we see that there's the sin of idleness going on.
Yeah.
How do we regard them? How do we approach them?
I think there is what you can't do is nothing, right?
Okay.
I think a lot of times we see a problem, we're like, we'll just not deal with that, right? And so you see this happening, and it should be something that should be addressed and then dealt with, right? If someone is not working and they're looking for handouts, then don't, there's a definite line there where you need to, communicate this is not good, right? You're not doing what you ought to be doing and caring for your home, yourself. But there is this, the way that you do it, you don't want to see them as an enemy, right? And so there's a couple of maybe motivations behind that. You want them to be motivated through shame, right? You want them to get to the point where they're realizing, I can't do this anymore. But there's also, you want them to be motivated by, and you're motivated by the love that you have for them. as you admonish him as a brother, right? Dealing with brothers can be an interesting thing, right? I don't have any brothers, so I have a sister, and I watch my kids, the brothers, as they work with each other. Man, they're really honest, and they say it like it is, and then they love each other, and there's this unique relationship between brothers, and so here we have this unique relationship between believers. We're able to enjoy that.
Yep. And the only way you could do that is by getting in there, like being a part of their lives,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Get in
Wow. Chris Dotson, time went so fast. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
leading us through this very difficult conversation. And I'm glad I was really impressed. Thank you. And thank you, friend, for joining us today.